The man had been walking the streets for many years. Life had not been kind to him, but he carried a quiet strength that came from surviving the harshest days without losing his heart. His clothes were worn and patched, and his shoes had holes, letting the cold winter air touch his toes. He kept his hair long, tangled, and dusty, and his face was rough from years of sun and wind. Despite everything, there was a light in his eyes, a spark of hope that refused to go out. Every morning he would wake up under the bridge near the edge of the city. The concrete was cold and hard, but it was the only place that offered him some shelter from the wind. He had a small backpack that contained his few belongings: a torn blanket, a notebook with scribbles, a small knife, and the last $8 he had saved from a kind stranger who had given him some money the week before. $8 was almost nothing, but it meant the world to him. It could buy a few meals if he was careful, and that was enough to keep him going. The man had grown used to the loneliness of the streets. He knew every alley, every corner, and every person who passed by. Most ignored him, some laughed at him, and a few gave him a coin or a sandwich. He never expected anything from anyone. Life had taught him to take care of himself, and he had learned that survival required patience, observation, and a little kindness to those who truly needed it. That morning, the air was chilly, and the sky was gray. The streets were busy with people rushing to work, children dragging their backpacks, and the occasional dog barking at nothing. The man had found a small spot near a cafe where the sunlight touched the pavement. He spread his blanket, sat down, and counted his last $8 again. It was not much, but he had to make it last the week. As he looked around, he noticed a figure limping down the street. It was a man in his 30s wearing a leather jacket that had seen better days and a pair of old boots. He looked tired, hungry, and lost. The man studied him for a moment. There was something about him that seemed familiar, someone who had once been strong and proud but was now struggling. The man had a habit of noticing these details, the small tells that revealed a person's story without words. He saw the way the other man's shoulders slumped, the way his eyes searched for something he couldn't find, and the way he paused as if unsure of where to go next. Without thinking much, the man reached into his backpack and pulled out $2. It wasn't much, but it could buy a sandwich or a coffee. He got up and walked toward the struggling man, who was now leaning against a lamppost looking exhausted. "Hey," the man said softly. "You look like you could use something to eat." The other man looked up, startled. His eyes widened when he saw the homeless man holding out the money. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but the man shook his head. "It's okay. I don't need it." "Take it." The struggling man hesitated. Pride was strong in him, and he wasn't used to accepting help from someone who clearly had less than he did. But hunger and exhaustion won over pride. He took the money with trembling hands and whispered a quiet, "Thank you." The man smiled. He didn't ask for anything in return. Helping someone, even when he had almost nothing, was something that felt right in his heart. He had learned long ago that kindness was not about what you had, but about what you could give. He watched the other man walk into the cafe and use the money to get a small meal. The smell of food wafted through the air, making the man's stomach growl, but he did not mind. He had enough for himself, and he felt a quiet joy knowing he had helped someone in need. Days passed, and the man continued his routine. He begged for change, looked for food, and slept under the bridge at night. But every day he kept an eye out for the struggling man. He didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but he felt a connection. Sometimes he would see him from a distance, walking with more energy, looking slightly better, and it made the man's heart lift. It was a small victory, but it was enough. One afternoon, the man noticed the struggling man again, this time outside a motorcycle repair shop. The man seemed frustrated, leaning against his bike and trying to fix something that clearly needed more than just a quick repair. The homeless man approached slowly, careful not to scare him. "Need some help?" he asked. The struggling man looked at him, unsure if he could trust someone who lived on the streets. But there was a sincerity in the man's eyes that he couldn't ignore. I don't have the tools or the money to fix it," he admitted. "I just don't know what to do." The man looked at the motorcycle. He didn't know much about engines, but he had watched people work on them before. Sometimes observing was enough to help. He knelt down and started examining the bike, offering advice and pointing out small things the struggling man could try. They worked together quietly, and after a while, the bike started running again. The struggling man's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "You saved me," he said quietly. "I don't know how to repay you." The man shook his head. "No need, just be kind to someone else when you can. That's enough for me." It was a simple moment, but it carried a weight neither of them could fully understand. The homeless man had given his last $8 to help someone who was proud, strong, and yet struggling. In return, he had earned the trust and respect of someone who could have ignored him, laughed at him, or walked away. But he didn't, and that was enough. That night, the man slept under his bridge, wrapped in his worn blanket, thinking about the day. He felt tired, cold, and hungry, but there was a warmth in his heart. He knew that what he had done mattered. Sometimes he thought about his life and all the hardships he had endured, but he never felt sorry for himself. Instead, he believed that every small act of kindness was a seed, and one day those seeds would grow into something larger than anyone could imagine. The next morning, he woke up to the sound of engines roaring in the distance. He rubbed his eyes, wondering if it was a dream. But then he saw a glimpse of leather jackets and motorcycles lining the street. For a moment, he thought he must be imagining things. How could so many people appear all at once? He had no idea that the simple act of giving his last $8 to a struggling man had begun a ripple far beyond his understanding. The man smiled, not knowing exactly what would happen next, but feeling a quiet hope. He had learned that life was full of surprises and that sometimes the smallest gestures could lead to the greatest changes. He had given everything he had without expecting anything in return, and in doing so he had set something in motion that would change his life forever. The struggling man walked down the street, pushing his bike with effort. He felt the sting of embarrassment, the weight of pride crushed by necessity. He could barely believe a homeless man had helped him, a stranger with nothing, yet who had given what little he had without hesitation. Every time he thought about the $8 and the advice, a strange warmth filled him, a mix of gratitude, respect, and surprise at the generosity of someone who had so little. The struggling man worked odd jobs here and there, mostly small things to keep food on his table and gas in his bike. Even with his best efforts, it wasn't enough. Bills stacked up, and his bike, his only reliable transportation, was old and temperamental. Yet the kindness he had received gave him a new sense of purpose. He remembered the words the man had spoken. "Be kind to someone else when you can. That's enough for me." Days turned into weeks, and the struggling man found himself returning to the same streets where he had met the homeless man. At first he walked past, unsure if he should intrude on the man's life. The man was always there, in the same place near the bridge, quietly observing the world. Each time he looked calm, peaceful even, despite his circumstances. Something about him stayed in the struggling man's mind, like a lesson being slowly revealed. One morning, the struggling man noticed the homeless man sitting on the pavement, counting coins and scribbling in his notebook. His eyes were tired, but they carried the same quiet strength the struggling man remembered. He approached slowly, hesitant. "Hey," he said, his voice low. Do you want some coffee? I can buy you one." The homeless man looked up, surprised. "You don't need to do that," he said, shaking his head. But the struggling man insisted. Coffee wasn't much, but it was a gesture, a way to show that the kindness had come full circle. They sat together at a small table outside the cafe. The struggling man bought 2 cups, hot and steaming, and handed one to the homeless man. He watched him sip slowly, as if savoring the warmth as much as the taste. Silence passed between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of understanding, of 2 people sharing a moment without needing words. "You really helped me," the struggling man said finally. I don't know why, but it meant a lot. "More than you can imagine," the homeless man shrugged. "I didn't do it for anything in return. I just saw someone who needed help. That's all? Everyone has tough days. If I can make someone's day a little easier, then it's worth it." The struggling man looked down at his hands, thinking, most people wouldn't have done that. They'd have ignored me or laughed or, worse. The homeless man nodded. "I know, people judge too quickly, but sometimes the smallest acts mean the most. That's how life works." From that moment, a bond began to form between them. The struggling man started to stop by more often, sharing small stories about his day, the challenges he faced, and the little victories that kept him going. The homeless man listened, offered advice when he could, and sometimes just nodded, letting the other man speak his heart. One day, the struggling man returned, looking exhausted and frustrated. His bike had broken down again and he had no money for repairs. He leaned against the bridge, feeling the weight of his problems pressing down. The homeless man noticed immediately. Without a word, he walked over and said, "Let's see what we can do." They examined the bike together. The homeless man didn't know all the technical details, but he had seen people fix things before and remembered small tips. He suggested tightening bolts, adjusting the chain, and checking the engine. The struggling man followed his instructions carefully, and after some effort, the bike sputtered to life. A smile spread across his face, a mix of relief and awe. He couldn't believe a homeless man had helped him again without asking for anything. You really saved me," he said quietly, emotion catching in his throat. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." The homeless man shook his head again. "Just remember what I said. Be kind to someone else when you can. That's the only repayment I need." The struggling man watched him walk away that day, feeling a mix of admiration and confusion. He wondered how someone who had nothing could be so generous, so selfless. It didn't make sense to him, but it made him want to be better, to live with the same quiet strength and generosity. Word started to spread among the struggling man's friends. They noticed a change in him. He was calmer, more patient, and strangely inspired by someone who lived on the streets. They asked him about it, and he told them stories about the homeless man, the $8, and the small acts of kindness that had changed his perspective. Some didn't believe him at first, thinking it was a made-up story, but the struggling man insisted, sharing details that only someone who had truly experienced it could know. One evening, as the sun began to set and the streets filled with the golden light of dusk, the struggling man returned to the bridge. He found the homeless man sitting quietly, staring at the sky. He approached slowly and said, "I want to do something for you. You've helped me so much. Let me at least help you." The homeless man smiled faintly. "I don't need anything. I've got enough for now, but if you want to help someone else. That's enough." The struggling man shook his head. "I mean right now. I want to make sure you're okay. You've given me so much and I can't just sit here and do nothing." The homeless man considered this. He had spent years surviving on the streets, learning to accept little and give much. But there was a sincerity in the struggling man's eyes that touched him. "All right," he said quietly. "Maybe just a little help, but only what's needed." Together they walked through the nearby streets, collecting food from a small market, finding blankets from a donation bin, and gathering small essentials. It wasn't much, but it made a difference. The homeless man felt the kindness and effort of someone who had so little yet wanted to give. It was a feeling he had almost forgotten, a reminder that human connection could exist even in the hardest circumstances. Days passed, and the bond between them grew stronger. They became more than just strangers helping each other. They were friends connected by respect, gratitude, and a shared understanding of life's difficulties. The struggling man started to see the value of generosity in a new light. It wasn't about money or possessions. It was about heart, about noticing someone's need and acting without expectation. One afternoon, as the struggling man left the bridge, he turned back and noticed the homeless man scribbling in his notebook. He wondered what the man was writing, but he didn't ask. Some things were personal, private, meant to be kept close to the heart. Instead, he smiled, nodded, and walked away, carrying with him the lessons he had learned, the lessons of giving, trusting and caring without hesitation. Little did either of them know, this small act of kindness, the $8, the advice, the shared moments, was beginning to grow into something far larger than they could imagine. Something that would ripple through their lives and the lives of countless others, and neither of them could have predicted just how powerful a simple act of generosity could become. After weeks of quiet interactions and small acts of kindness, the struggling man began to share the story of the homeless man with a few of his closest biker friends. He spoke of the $8, the advice, and the way the homeless man had helped him fix his bike and regain some dignity. At first, his friends were skeptical. They had seen the tough streets and tough people, and they found it hard to believe that someone with nothing could show such generosity. But the struggling man insisted. He shared every detail, the worn-out clothes, the tired eyes, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from the man, even as he counted his coins on the cold pavement. His friends started to understand. They recognized the courage it took to live with so little, and the purity of heart it took to give what little you had without expecting anything back. Soon, word spread through their small circle, and the story grew. Bikers began to talk about the homeless man as if he were a legend, someone whose actions were a reminder of what true kindness looked like. They admired his spirit, his resilience, and the simple way he had chosen to help another human being, even when his own life was uncertain. The struggling man could feel a shift in the atmosphere. His friends began to see him differently too, not as someone weak or unlucky, but as someone who had experienced a genuine act of selflessness and understood its value. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and humanity that could not be taught by books or words alone. One afternoon, the struggling man decided to take action. He gathered his friends and told them where the homeless man stayed each day. He explained the situation. The man was struggling, living on the streets, yet he had given his last $8 to help another person. They had to do something, not as a charity or a handout, but as a gesture of respect and gratitude. The bikers listened, nodding as the struggling man spoke. There was a quiet determination in the group. They respected courage, loyalty, and generosity, and the story of the homeless man contained all three. They agreed to meet the next morning, but the struggling man insisted on doing it quietly without making a scene. They weren't there to embarrass the man or turn it into a spectacle. They just wanted to show him that his actions mattered. The following day, the homeless man woke up to an unusual sound, the low rumble of engines in the distance. At first he thought it was just another group of riders passing by. But the sound grew louder, approaching the bridge where he spent most of his mornings. He stood up slowly, squinting against the early morning sun. When he saw the motorcycles lining the street, his heart skipped a beat. Dozens of bikes, all parked neatly, engines idling, their riders standing near the edge of the street. The homeless man's eyes widened in disbelief. He had never expected anything like this. His first thought was fear. He didn't know who these people were or why they were here. But as the riders started walking toward him one by one, he noticed familiar faces. The struggling man was at the front, smiling warmly, introducing him quietly to the others. "Hey," the struggling man said softly. "These are my friends. They wanted to meet you to thank you for what you did." The homeless man shook his head, overwhelmed. He had given nothing extraordinary, just his last $8 and some advice. But here were people showing up in numbers he had never imagined. He struggled to find words, his throat dry, his hands trembling slightly. The bikers stepped forward one by one, offering blankets, food, and warm clothing. They spoke kindly, with respect and admiration, telling him how much his actions had touched them and inspired them. Some handed him envelopes with money, insisting he use it for food or supplies. Others just smiled, clapped him on the shoulder, and nodded in silent recognition of his courage and generosity. The homeless man felt a flood of emotions: gratitude, surprise, disbelief, and joy all at once. Tears threatened to spill from his eyes, but he held them back. He had spent so long alone, surviving, giving when he could, expecting nothing, and now the kindness he had shown had returned to him in a way he never imagined. They spent the day with him, talking, sharing stories, and listening. Some bikers told him about their own struggles, their own experiences of hardship and loss. The homeless man realized that despite their tough exteriors and intimidating appearance, these people had hearts full of loyalty, respect, and compassion. They were a community, bound not just by motorcycles or leather jackets, but by the understanding of what it meant to survive, to give, and to support one another. The struggling man stayed close, explaining how the homeless man had helped him, how he had given everything he had without asking for anything in return. The bikers listened intently, nodding in agreement, impressed by the purity of the gesture. It was a reminder of the kind of humanity that often went unnoticed in a world focused on money, status, and competition. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows on the street, the bikers packed up their things. But before they left, the homeless man stood among them, feeling a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. He realized that in helping someone, he had opened a door, not just for the struggling man, but for himself. This small act of kindness had grown into a wave of generosity and respect, touching hundreds of lives. And now he was part of it. The struggling man and the homeless man watched as the bikers rode away, their engines fading into the distance. There was a silence between them, filled not with words but with understanding. The homeless man looked at the struggling man, his eyes soft and full of gratitude. I don't know what to say," he admitted. I never expected this. I was just doing what felt right. The struggling man smiled. That's exactly why it matters. You didn't do it for recognition or reward. You did it because it was the right thing to do. And now look, so many people have been touched by it. So many lives have changed because of one small act. The homeless man nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. He had lived a long time in survival mode, expecting little from life and giving what he could, but never imagining that his actions could ripple outward in such a powerful way. He realized that kindness, even when unnoticed at the moment, had the ability to grow, spread, and transform lives beyond what he could ever predict. In the days that followed, the bridge no longer felt like a lonely place. The struggling man continued to visit, sharing meals, stories, and laughter. The homeless man found that his world had expanded, filled with people who respected him and cared for him. And while he still lived simply, still faced the challenges of life on the streets, he carried a new sense of hope, a renewed belief in the goodness of people, and the power of a single selfless act to change everything. The next morning, the homeless man woke up to a sound he had never expected, the deep rolling roar of engines echoing down the street. At first, he thought it was just another group of bikers passing by, the usual rumble he had grown accustomed to in the city. But the sound grew louder, more persistent, and as he peered over the edge of his blanket, his eyes widened. Motorcycles filled the street, lined in neat rows, leather jackets gleaming in the morning sun. He rubbed his eyes, convinced he was dreaming. This could not be real. Curiosity mixed with caution as he stood, his worn boots making little sound on the concrete. The struggling man appeared at his side, a calm presence amid the chaos. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. "They're here because of you. They came to thank you." The homeless man shook his head, disbelief written on his face. "Me? But I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just helped." The struggling man smiled. "Exactly. That's why they respect you. You helped without expecting anything in return." Slowly, the riders began to approach. One by one, they stepped forward, greetings spoken with respect and warmth. There was no judgment, no ridicule, just a simple, raw acknowledgement of the kindness the homeless man had shown. Some carried food, blankets, and warm clothing, while others handed him envelopes, insisting he take them. It wasn't charity. It was respect, gratitude, and recognition of the heart he had shown in a world that often lacked it. Tears threatened to spill as the homeless man accepted the offerings, each gesture feeling surreal. He had lived so long in the shadows, unnoticed and ignored, yet here was a group of people, hundreds of them, all acknowledging the value of what he had done. He struggled to find words, opening his mouth and closing it again. The words that could match the magnitude of the moment were elusive. The struggling man guided him through the crowd, introducing him quietly to as many bikers as possible. Names were exchanged, smiles given, and stories shared. Some bikers told of their own hardships, the struggles that had shaped them into the people they were today. Others spoke of loyalty and trust, of how small acts of kindness could ripple out to touch many lives. The homeless man listened, absorbing the words and feeling a sense of belonging that he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just the gifts or the gestures that overwhelmed him. It was the acknowledgement of his humanity, the respect for his courage, and the recognition that a small act could create a wave of generosity far beyond what he had imagined. Each rider represented a connection, a ripple, a network of people who valued character over circumstance. The day unfolded in a blur of engines, laughter, and conversation. The homeless man sat in the middle of it all, sharing stories with the bikers and listening to theirs. He realized that these were people who had faced their own battles, people who understood struggle and survival, people who could recognize the significance of compassion even in its smallest form. He felt a sense of equality for the first time in years, a reminder that kindness and courage were more important than money, power, or social status. At one point, a biker handed him a thick jacket and a pair of sturdy boots. "You'll need these," he said simply. "Keep yourself warm." Another offered a gift card to a local diner, insisting he could use it to eat whenever he needed. The homeless man's hands shook as he accepted these gifts, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness he was receiving. For a long moment he was silent, feeling gratitude fill him so completely that words were unnecessary. The struggling man watched the scene unfold with pride. He knew the impact the homeless man had on him, But seeing how his generosity had touched hundreds of bikers, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had known that kindness could grow, but this was beyond what he could have imagined. It was living proof that compassion, even from someone with nothing, could inspire an entire community. Hours passed as the bikers mingled, talked, and shared their lives. The homeless man listened quietly, contributing where he could, and learning more about the people who had come to honor him. There was laughter, quiet conversation, and the kind of understanding that transcended words. In that moment, he felt a profound connection to the world around him, something he had not felt in a very long time. As the sun began to set, the bikers started to prepare to leave. The homeless man stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling a mix of emotions: joy, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had given what little he had, and in return, he had been given far more than he could have imagined: recognition, respect, and a community that cared. The struggling man came to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Look what you've started," he said quietly. "All because you chose to help someone when they needed it. Never underestimate the power of kindness." The homeless man nodded, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. He had survived the streets, given what he could, and now he realized that even the smallest gesture could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he had never expected. The bikers had left gifts, warm clothing, and heartfelt thanks. But the true gift was something deeper: the understanding that his life mattered, that his actions mattered, and that even someone with nothing could make a profound difference. As night fell, the homeless man returned to his usual spot, now feeling a sense of hope he hadn't known in years. He unpacked the gifts, carefully organizing them, and sat for a long moment reflecting on the day. The world had shifted in a way he had never imagined, all because of a single act of generosity and a willingness to help another human being. The bridge, once a lonely and cold place, now felt different. It carried the echoes of engines, laughter, and the warmth of hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by his actions. The homeless man wrapped himself in a blanket, staring at the stars beginning to emerge in the night sky, feeling a sense of peace and connection he hadn't felt in a long time. He had survived, given, and now he was part of something larger, a community bound by respect, gratitude, and the quiet power of kindness. In the days that followed, the homeless man noticed subtle changes in the city around him. People greeted him more warmly, offered small gestures of kindness, and treated him with a new level of respect. He realized that the ripple effect of his actions had begun, extending far beyond the bikers and the struggling man. The city, in its own small ways, had become a little kinder, a little more human, because of one act of generosity from someone who had nothing to give but his heart. In the days that followed, the homeless man's life began to change in ways he could never have imagined. The gifts and the warm gestures from the bikers had helped him survive the harsh streets with more ease. But the true change came from something deeper, a sense of hope, respect, and belonging that had been missing for many years. He still woke up under the bridge each morning, but now he did so with a smile. The world felt different, not because the streets had changed, but because he had experienced the warmth of human kindness in a way that reminded him he was not invisible. People passed by with nods of recognition. Shopkeepers offered him small treats, and strangers occasionally stopped to talk. It was a subtle change, but one that meant everything. The struggling man continued to visit, bringing news of the biker community and checking in to make sure the homeless man had what he needed. They shared meals, laughter, and stories. Their bond had grown stronger, a quiet friendship built on respect, gratitude, and understanding. The homeless man realized that he had been part of a larger story, one that began with a simple act of giving and had grown far beyond what he could have imagined. One morning, as he was sitting on the pavement sipping a cup of coffee a stranger had offered him, a group of bikers arrived again. This time it was not just a few of them, but nearly the whole club. They had come to check on him, to make sure he was doing well, and to offer continued support. The homeless man felt overwhelmed, his heart swelling with gratitude and disbelief. They brought more clothes, food, and blankets, enough to last him weeks. Some even offered him money to help him get back on his feet. The homeless man accepted it humbly, not as charity but as a lifeline. It was the community, the friendship, and the respect that mattered most to him. He realized that his small gesture of kindness had sparked something much bigger, a network of support that now surrounded him. The struggling man pulled him aside. "You've done more than help me," he said softly. "You've shown all of us what it means to care. We respect you and we want to help you live better, not just survive." The homeless man looked at him, emotions running high. I never thought my actions would matter this much. I only did what I could with what little I had." "That's exactly why it matters," the struggling man replied. "Because it came from your heart, not because you expected something in return." The homeless man felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. The streets had been a place of survival, hardship, and loneliness, but now they felt alive with possibilities. He realized that kindness could return in ways far beyond imagination, and that even the smallest act could create ripples that changed lives. Over the next few weeks, he began to use the support he received to improve his life. The bikers helped him find a small room to rent, gave him clothes that were durable and warm, and guided him toward food resources and community centers. He still remembered the days when he had nothing, but now he had stability and a safety net he had never known. But more importantly, he found a new purpose. The homeless man wanted to give back, to spread the same kindness that had changed his life. He began helping others on the street, offering food, advice, and small gestures of support wherever he could. The lessons he had learned from the bikers and the struggling man guided him. He understood now that giving wasn't about wealth or status, but about noticing someone's need and acting without expectation. He became a quiet figure of hope on the streets, someone people remembered for their generosity and kindness. The struggling man continued to support him, but the homeless man no longer felt dependent or powerless. He had learned that even in the hardest circumstances, he could make a difference, and that difference could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he had never imagined. Months later, the homeless man reflected on his journey. From the day he gave his last $8 to help a struggling man, his life had transformed completely. He had found friendship, respect, and a sense of community. He had been given a chance to survive with dignity, and in return, he had learned the true power of kindness. The bikers remained a presence in his life, visiting from time to time, sharing meals, stories, and laughter. The struggling man had become his closest friend, a constant reminder of the bond that had formed through mutual respect and care. Together, they had created a network of support, proof that a single act of generosity could inspire a ripple effect far beyond expectation. The homeless man now walked the streets not with despair, but with purpose and confidence. He knew that life would always have challenges, but he also knew that kindness, when given freely, had the power to transform lives. He had experienced it firsthand, and now he was determined to continue it, one small act at a time. In the evenings, as he sat in his small rented room, wrapped in the warmth of a blanket and reflecting on his journey, he felt a profound sense of peace. The days of hunger, cold, and loneliness were behind him, replaced by a life filled with gratitude, friendship, and the quiet joy of making a difference. He had learned that even the smallest gesture, a few dollars, a helping hand, or a kind word, could create waves that reached far beyond the moment. The homeless man had given his last $8 to help someone in need, and in return, he had been given a world filled with generosity, respect, and hope. He had discovered the true meaning of human connection and the power of compassion. And as he looked out at the streets he had once called home, he smiled, knowing that kindness had changed not just his life, but the lives of countless others around him. His story was a reminder that even in the hardest of times, a single act of selflessness could inspire a ripple that transformed the world.